Well, good morning, everybody, on a balmy summer day. I didn't catch the temperature, but it might have a minus sign in front of it today, December 13th. Pleased to have some of our local government representatives, as Commissioner uh, Halverson has just identified them. We're going to talk about housing. And I'm really delighted that all of you came, although you're certainly not out gardening today. But because we have some conflicts going on, and I'm glad that you're all here. So right now we have Laurie Halverson and from Dakota County and Gary Hansen, looking to see if Representative Mike Howard is joining us. Don't see him yet. We'll get him to introduce himself if and when he joins. So, Laurie and Gary, I think everybody on the call knows you, but why don't you introduce yourselves and your role, and we'll get into housing as part of that introduction. Where do you fit in the housing scheme? Laurie, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. I am Laurie Halverson. Thank you for the invite to talk a little bit about what Dakota County does in the space of housing and housing services. I have been a Dakota County Commissioner. I was elected in 2020. Thank you for your help in doing that. Prior to that, I served 8 years in the Minnesota legislature, where on the housing space, I got to work on youth homelessness and specifically, and getting the first infusions of dollars from $250,000 where the state had started. And when I left, we were up to 11 million. And so in infusions and dollars for youth homelessness. And I remember my first press conference I had on the Homeless Youth Act was on a day very much like today. And it is so fitting to talk about housing and homelessness and shelter at a time when just being outdoors is a danger. And so it really tells you what the imperative of housing availability and homeless services are in our state. So, and it is something that we work on at all levels of government. So I'll turn it over to my colleague Gary Hansen at the city.
Thank you, Lori. Yes, Gary Hansen, in my fifth term on the Eagan City Council, and we certainly work closely with the county. Our housing agency is actually the county's community development agency, and we have an excellent working relationship with the CDA. Eagan has a population of nearly 70,000 and about 30,000 housing units. And so we work closely with the CDA on workforce and affordable housing. The CDA administers, oh gosh, more than 30 different housing programs on behalf of homeowners and tenants, and Eagan residents have greatly benefited from those programs. Um, we currently in Eagan have about 500 CDA housing units, and that's about 70%, 17% of the CDA's housing portfolio. And so that, includes senior housing as well as workforce housing and youth supportive housing and some public housing. And Ron, you raised the question right at the start about is there a housing shortage? Well, the Metropolitan Council estimates that Eagan will need an additional 4,700 housing units by 2050. And so we currently have plans by 2040 to add about 3,000 units. So to get that remaining 1,700 units, that'll require some changes to the land use, our land uses, and or revising our residential development expectations to meet those Met Council forecasts. So yeah, we do have that challenge. We are committed to meeting it, and whatever we need to do in conjunction with the county, we're working on that.
So, Lori, I'd like you to pick up that question. Do we have a housing shortage? Before you take that on, I just want to remind everybody, if you've got a question, please raise your electronic hand if you can find it down on the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, wave a little bit. I don't really easily pick up on things coming across in chat, but if that's your only mechanism, I'll try to pay attention to those as well. So, Lori, do we have a housing shortage? And as a follow-up or a corollary question to that, how do you measure it? Gary says there's a need for 4,700 housing units by 2050. First, that's a long time. But how do you know? How do you measure
So
that?
So yes and yes. As Gary said, the Met Council has done their estimate. We also, and I put it in the chat, Dakota County CDA did an assessment in 2024 of what the housing needs are in Dakota County. And it's something that I asked for a lot because I feel like we're trying to solve a math problem. So here's where we are. We are a growing county. Um, the ninth largest or the ninth fastest growing city in the country is in Dakota County, and that's Rosemont. Lakeville is growing extremely quickly. And so, yeah, housing builds continue to happen around the county. However, what we're adding, about half of what we're adding is housing stock in the neighborhood of $400,000 or more. That is not affordable. So it's not we're not building for communities to grow across demographic lines, right? Young families getting started are usually not in the position to buy that top tier housing, and you need steps for people to afford. Dakota County does have, especially in Egan, some older housing stock, which is great. But the other thing that's true is people like staying where they are in Dakota County. And so we need to make sure that we are adding housing stock across the continuum, not just at the top. And right now we are really skewed toward adding housing toward the top, and that's where the CDA comes in. Uh, and so we are making plans, as Gary said, on how much to build. The CDA gets federal government funding, some state funding. We have not availed of ourselves of the amount of state funding because they've been a more challenging partner in terms of what we want to do. And the CDA builds a great product, and then we bring in support for the families that are moving in. Um, and so we build some of the most affordable units available in the Seven County metro area. And it gets people a start. And I'm a big believer in two things. One, you got to be able to live where you work. We shouldn't have to drive people across the metro to work in our beautiful communities if they don't get to live in our beautiful communities. And I truly believe that you need young families moving into our communities to build the investment in our communities. We are very quickly becoming a community where there are more people over 65 than there are people under 5 years old, and that is that shifts our economic balance in a concerning way. So you'll see in the chat there is a housing needs assessment. It's dense, but it really does show us where the needs are and where we need to move into a better balance. And I will just wrap up and say the CDA, I get to serve on the CDA board, the Community Development Agency board, as a Dakota County Commissioner. And so I get to be on the entire housing continuum in Dakota County. So from prevention to shelter to housing stability, that is our housing continuum. And the county works on prevention and shelter, and the CDA is building units. Our community of Egan is one of the best partners in Dakota County. I'll just say it, it's the best partner in Dakota County. Egan started investing in affordable housing before any other community, and with the CDA, and continues to find ways to partner with us. And the newest way is the Delta site here in Egan, but honestly, other cities are not as welcoming to affordable housing development, and it is not going to serve them well because affordable housing is an economic development strategy.
I noticed that Representative Howard has
Oh,
joined us. Good
good.
morning. We're glad to have you here. We just got started. The first question up was, is there a housing shortage? How do you know? How do you measure it? And the fun thing, for me at least, is that we've got representatives from three levels of government, the state legislature, the county, and the city, all to talk about their programs. So, Representative Howard, first off, introduce yourself, but take on this question. How do these various layers of government work together? Um, where's the money come from? Is there any overlap, conflict, stepping on toes? But it really starts with, do we have a housing shortage in your view, and what do you think we need to do about it? So, good morning.
Hello there. Sorry, I had an internet issue. Was that an intro for me to connect?
Oh, it was.
Okay, good.
Let I can repeat quickly. Introduce yourself. Tell me whether you think there's a housing shortage. How do the governmental layers work together to solve it?
Great. Thank you for the invite. And sorry to be a little late this morning. As you might imagine, in your community, these last 2 weeks have I represent Richfield, and we've frankly been under attack by ICE, and so that's what we've been dealing with here in Richfield. So my name is Mike Howard. I'm a state representative. I represent Richfield and a bit of South Minneapolis, and I'm the co-chair of our housing committee in the Minnesota House. Um, we absolutely have a massive housing shortage in the state of Minnesota. Um, the by
Progress.
by all accounts, and lots of evidence, we're about 100,000 units short of housing in
Is
the
that
state.
statewide?
That's statewide in the state of
Okay.
Minnesota.
All right.
And the with the pronounced, we're short of units across the spectrum. So affordable units for rental, in the deepest affordable, all the way up to available, home ownership opportunities. And this is not a Minnesota unique challenge. This is across the country. It would basically, in our country after the Great Recession, there was a huge dip in home production all across the country, and we've sort of never caught up. And the impacts of this housing shortage are being felt across the housing continuum. And, something I've always said, and the reason that I've focused on housing is because, I say everything starts with home. If families have access to a safe, stable, affordable place to live, that gives them the ability to get ahead, or to not fall behind in school, or to have the economic wherewithal they need to thrive and succeed. But that gap is causing so many ripple effects in our community, the lack of affordability. And so what does that mean for Minnesotans, this 100,000 unit gap in housing? What it has meant over the last decade in particular is that it's basic supply demand. Housing prices have soared both for renters and for homeowners. And now in the state of Minnesota, there isn't the median income does not support the ability to buy a home in any county in the metro area in most of the entire state of Minnesota. And so that shows up with what folks tell me all the time is, look, the neighborhood I grew up in, my son, my daughter, they can't afford to buy a house in the community where we grew up. And so the escalating price of home ownership is causing huge impacts for affordability. One other way to say this is the high demand jobs that we have in the state of Minnesota cannot afford places to live in their community. Even a nurse in the state of Minnesota, with their salary, is not able to afford to live in the communities where they work. And when I say afford, that's a term that people often want to understand. So there's a understood standard that if you pay more than 30% of your income in your housing costs, that is too much. That means you're going to be, living paycheck to paycheck. You're kind of one bad break away from being in really tough straits. And the amount of Minnesotans that are cost burdened or paying more than 30% of their income in housing continues to go up every year. And the latest study, and this is old, so it's probably much worse than this now, is that more than 600,000 Minnesotans across the state are paying more than 30% of their income in housing. And so again, you kind of look at those ripple negative effects when so many of our residents aren't able to truly afford the roof over their head. So what do we do about it? Housing is a challenge that we really need every level of government to be in solutions mode, in creative mode, in how do we change the status quo? Because what's so clear is the status quo isn't working. We're not building enough homes, and the problem keeps getting worse. And so a few of the things I would note, kind of two lanes of solutions that I think we need to be focused on. One is public investment. So we drastically underinvest in housing in the state of Minnesota. And I often give this example. If our state general fund was an entire gallon jug of water, right now, our base budget, we spend less than a tablespoon on housing. 0.3% of our state general fund budget goes to housing. And when you think about how connected everything else we're trying to solve at the state level, improving educational outcomes, reducing homelessness, making sure communities are growing and strong, 0.3% is not going to cut it. And in particular, public investment is needed to build especially the most deeply affordable units of housing. Commissioner Halverson was talking about a lot of the work they're doing in Dakota County, and it is excellent, excellent work. And to build especially those dedicated, deeply affordable units of housing, there needs to be a mix of public investment that can come from the county level, that can come from the state level. The federal government has basically walked away for decades in terms of investment in housing, but we need that public investment piece. In 2023, with our large budget surplus, we did direct $1 billion investment. That was more than 10 times we've ever spent on housing, and that's going to do a lot of good. That's put more resources into the pipeline and will help us build thousands of units of housing that, but for that public investment, wouldn't be built. We also, speaking to the partnership we have with our local units of government, for the first time created what's called local housing aid, and through the Metro sales tax, a dedicated investment that goes to housing that largely goes directly to cities and to counties to invest in local affordable housing solutions that meet their goals. Dakota County has been one of the excellent partners to utilize this new resource, to leverage it in ways that will help kind of double their efforts to invest in the kinds of homes that are most needed. But what I would say about the public investment piece for the long term, most of the $1 billion that we invested in housing was a one-time infusion to build more units, to provide both to rent, both to own. But a lot of those investments, which are still being sent out, were one time. And so our current budget we're back to that tablespoon. We're back to that 0.3%. So in the long term, one of the solutions that I have authored and championed is creating dedicated revenue that would go directly to housing and directly to help us build the units of housing that we so desperately need. Affordable units to rent, a few affordable units to own. The current iteration of that bill would do this through a constitutional amendment, similar to the legacy amendment, where you would dedicate a very small portion of the sales tax, and we would utilize a stream of that money to invest in affordable apartments and rental units, a stream of that money to invest in affordable home ownership opportunities, and a stream of resources in direct rental assistance. So on the rental assistance front, just a minute on that. Um, you know, in Minnesota, only 1 in 4 Minnesotans that qualify for a federal Section 8 housing voucher gets it. And I've always found this to be kind of cruel in the sense that it's a federal program that is limited. With SNAP benefits, we've had a lot of talk about SNAP benefits. If families are hungry, you can access that SNAP benefit. It's not capped in some way. But in housing, it is capped. And I would argue that it's as much of a necessity, right in that hierarchy of needs. And so in recent years, we've looked at solutions to provide state resources to provide direct rental assistance that would sort of mimic a Section 8 voucher. And our constitutional amendment would create those pathways too. So
So let me
that,
stop. Let me stop you for a
okay,
second because I've got a couple of people with hands up,
got it.
and I'd love to let them ask their questions.
Beautiful.
Curtis, I think you had your hand up first.
Sure. Um, well, I mean, we're talking about housing affordability, especially on the low end. The way the market works right now, it's basically impossible to build for the market to profitably build housing for low income people or new housing for low income people, which is one of the reasons you're talking about public investment. But one of the things I really find fascinating is how, one of the reasons why it's so expensive is because productivity in the construction sector obviously has not kept pace with the rest of the economy. It's been stagnant since about 1960. Um, and I would like to, I guess I've always wondered, why is this the case? Why hasn't productivity grown in the construction sector? Why are we not getting more output from the same hours like the rest of the economy? I mean, is it technology? Is it a lack of innovation? Is it regulation? Like, what is there anything we could do? Because I mean, if it's something like regulation, we could maybe make a change that would increase productivity, increase the amount of housing we can build for a certain amount of dollars, and that would be kind of like free housing from that perspective. So like, what can we do to improve productivity in the construction industry?
That is a really good question with, I think, a myriad of potential solutions. It is very challenging to craft, public policies that, in a very large way, take a bite out of that challenge. But there are, we're talking about funding now, but I also want to talk about policy change that we can make. There are regulatory things that occur, especially at the local level, that drive up the cost of housing. And that's another element of this that we absolutely must address. There are labor shortage issues, and that challenge may even worsen if we don't develop more solutions to get more good folks into the trades. We're sort of facing a lot of folks that might retire, that are in this workforce, and so solutions that we can develop in a broad sense that help kind of build our labor force are important. And so it is a myriad of things, and you're absolutely right that we should be looking at what policy levers can we have to maximize our efficiency, knowing all the things that are sort of out of our control, that are contributing to sort of cost pressures.
So what are some of those things that we can
Um,
control?
so this might be a good time to talk about our Yes to Homes legislative agenda. So our Yes to Homes legislative agenda is focused on what are sort of state level policy reforms that we can embark on to help reduce costs to build homes, and to build homes more sort of efficiently and in the right places. Um, if we're going to solve our housing shortage in the long term, we have to build more effectively, put homes in the right places, um, and find ways to kind of reduce costs per unit of housing we're building. And if we do this, that will, one, there's myriad of benefits. One, it'll help us reduce costs, grow supply, and help our sort of basic supply demand mismatch. And two, it'll actually help us address climate change, because one of the biggest challenges facing us on climate change is how we are, where we're building homes, and the level of traffic miles have to be associated with that as well. And so what the Yes to Homes agenda represents is a belief that no one community or city can tackle this statewide housing shortage on its own, that we need a collective effort at the state level to make it easier to build the kinds of homes that Minnesotans want and need, and it could help us address this housing supply issue. And so that targets ways to make it easier to, say, build ADUs or build a duplex, so that we're back to the question about how can you do this more efficiently. Well, you can, if we can have a builder build a duplex, that is going to build two homes instead of one. That's going to reduce costs. It's going to help us create more supply in the long term. The other point I would note there is, as we build more homes in the private sector, there's a filtering net benefit of this. And what I mean by that is, even if we build an additional a market rate home gets built, let's say it costs even $500,000-$600,000. Nobody would say that's affordable, right? There's many in our community that would not be affordable to. But what we've seen in other states and other regions, and have data to back it up, is the filtering benefit. So somebody is moving out of their home or apartment to move into that $400,000 or $500,000 home, and creating a new home ownership opportunity, perhaps in an existing naturally occurring home that was built 20, 30 years ago in a community. And it's again, it's sort of some basic supply demand, but there's all kinds of regions across the country where they've even seen a big influx in market rate housing. It has helped hold down rents and hold down costs because of that multiplying effort when we build more units of housing.
Okay, so let me stop you here for a second. Laura Meyer has her hand up, but I'll come to you in a second. I want to give Laurie Halverson and Gary Hansen a shot at responding to some of the questions and some of the comments that you've made, because they are your partners in all of this. So, Laurie Halverson, you wanna tell us what you're thinking in response to all this?
Yeah, well, I think that, Curtis, your question really, I think, zeroes in on a portion of the problem. And I have, in Dakota County, we have been very proactive in trying to solve some of those gaps. And I've really come to appreciate the fact that, and CDA has been a great example of this, we don't have to turn a profit. And it makes us, and we get a little, the private sector gets a little annoyed with us, because we can put people into housing in very efficient ways. And we don't have to turn a profit. We have to house people, and we have to help people get stable. And I understand how that can throw the market out of balance. However, I also think that the builders have, as I said, focused on building profitable high end, or if they are in the affordable business, they aren't necessarily always committed for the long haul. They're looking at a portion of affordability in order to qualify for grants, and so it's always a fear for me that the private sector is going to pull out in their investment at some point. And so we do have to, and I really appreciate how creative Representative Howard has been about engaging the private sector. since we build housing in the public sector, I really am looking at the other parts of the continuum, and Representative Howard talked about the voucher program at the federal level, the housing choice voucher. Well, the we manage that for the federal government at the CDA. The waiting list is about 5 years long. So if you find yourself in need and you get yourself on the list, you've got years before you've got access to dollars. And your need is now, your need is today, and your need is for the kids. And so Dakota County took some of that local tax dollars that Representative Howard and his partners at the state put, and we're investing in a local voucher program to help bridge for people before that they qualify for the federal voucher. We also invest in emergency housing assistance. And so if you need help paying your mortgage or your rent, for a short period of time, we have cash available to do that through these programs. Because what we find is stability and prevention is really the place to invest. And so it's a scale, right? We want to be sure that people have access to supportive housing. And I will say, you may all remember a few years ago, Dakota County had partnerships with churches on a cold night like this, where our churches would open up their doors and we were rolling out mats. That's not happening, and people are thinking, you're not doing it. You're not sheltering people. But what we invested in instead is, instead of those short-term fixes, we invested in rapid rehousing instead. And so it's not as visible. So people may think we're not doing shelter in the same way. And we actually are doing it much more effectively and efficiently, and getting people more quickly into housing stability through programs like that. So again, for me, the continuum is so vitally important, because it's amazing what a month or two of crisis in a family can do to somebody's long-term housing stability. And as you know, Representative Howard said, housing underpins everything. Can you have a job? Can your kids go to the school with their friends that they want to go to? Can you be safe and healthy? Housing is the underpinning need in all of those problems that we're trying to solve at the county, so, and at the state and at the city.
So let's hear from the city and Gary Hansen. Tell me your thoughts.
And they would like to live here, but they just can't afford it, and particularly young people. We thought that we would have what Representative Howard referred to as NOAA housing, naturally occurring affordable housing in certain areas of Eagan. It just hasn't happened because people are choosing to retire in place, and that's good for them. I'm glad they can do that. But it has limited opportunities, especially for younger families, to afford to buy a home in Eagan. The legislation that Representative Howard has mentioned has been debated over the past couple of sessions. And we certainly want to find solutions to the housing challenges that we face. We'd like to identify approaches to increase housing production while maintaining our city's ability to provide effective infrastructure and environmental and public safety systems. I have a concern that if there are limits placed on what we can do locally in terms of our zoning authority, that's going to preclude community involvement in making decisions on where we think that housing can be located. With all kinds of considerations of infrastructure support, roads and streets and sewer and water, and where really are the best places to put homes. And we want to retain that authority to be able to make those decisions with community involvement. And so I know that this issue will be raised again in the legislature, and we hope that we can come to some type of of a solution with our legislators to address the issue.
Gary, I take it you're involved in communication with both other levels of government to try and solve some of these problems.
Well, certainly, and you know, we're involved with other communities. We have lobbying representatives through the League of Minnesota Cities and metro cities, and we feel strongly that you know, let's try to solve this problem, but you know, there are potential implications to it that would impact on us locally that we think would be adverse. So let's try to find the best solutions that we can together.
Okay.
Can
Laura,
I,
I finally get, finally get,
sorry,
I'm
could
sorry.
I just respond to that quick? Because it was a really
Sure.
good question or a good comment. And I just wanted to mention that we are on year 3 of working on this issue, and the legislation that we've been doing a lot of engaging with our city partners, because this is a partnership. And we are working to figure out where is that right balance. And that's included folks from Egan. Mayor McGuire, I was just at a meeting including with a lot of mayors, and Mayor McGuire had a lot of really helpful suggestions. A couple things about our proposal this year that will be different is we really want to focus on cities making sure that we do want to sort of up our game as a state in terms of making it a little easier to build more types of housing. But we want to make sure that cities have the control about where this occurs, and to make basically guard against not allowing homes to be built where they shouldn't be built, essentially. And so the way we're thinking about this year is to sort of say cities of a certain size, we'd like you to find a third of your city that would support these additional housing types, but you decide where, and you decide how, and use your own city sort of rules how to do it. And then on the infrastructure piece, to be crystal clear, if public infrastructure does not support, or if there's environmental concerns, cities would have their ability to say, no, you can't build here. It doesn't make sense to build here. So those are just a few of the examples. Oh, and then the other piece is create a menu of options so that cities could choose from a list of things that might work better for their city than another city to implement. So, in previous iterations of the bill, there was preemptions regarding parking, because parking can be a big driver of cost, especially for multifamily. But some of the parking reform options would now be included on a menu. So a city could decide to elect one of those options, but maybe it's not the right choice for a certain city. They could choose a different option. Another option is to provide a density bonus if you're building senior housing, affordable housing, or workforce housing. Maybe that's a choice that another city might want. So I just want to speak to that. There's been just really great conversations and partnership, and I'm optimistic that we can work together in partnership with a lot of our cities to find a way to reach, I think, what is a shared goal, which is how do we together kind of meet this moment to build more homes that our citizens want.
And
Laura,
that is
finally
great.
get to
That is
you.
great to hear, Ron. If I could just add
Oh,
that,
okay.
that's really great. That's really great to hear, because as Representative Howard indicated, Mayor McGuire has been very active in testifying before the legislature in representing cities' interests, and so it looks like we're making progress. And maybe we'll get to a place that will be agreeable to us in the next legislative session. Look forward to that.
Tia, I saw you shaking your head no, and Lori, I saw you shaking your head no. Did I miss something, or
No,
did you
no,
have a
no, no.
comment?
I just thought that we could take a moment to get Lori's question. Her hand's been up for a while.
Yeah, right. That's where I wanted to go
Yeah,
next. Go
yeah.
ahead.
This is perfect timing because I can bring a little bit of a Burnsville lens to this, because I do live in the sliver of our district that is Burnsville, and Renee Florence brought up, hey, Burnsville's in our district too.
Yeah.
So because housing is an economic development issue, these topics came to us on the Burnsville Economic Development Commission over the last year. And so I've been part of a lot of conversations about how to use the LAHA funding. And in case people weren't aware, LAHA that Representative Howard brought up was that local affordable housing. It's a section of a local sales tax that is coming to various levels of government to be used for this purpose. And Burnsville is one of the cities in Dakota County that opted to decide how they wanted to use it directly, as opposed to just letting it go to the county and letting the county handle their portion of it. So we've got a little different perspective on that, and that all came in front of the commission that I've been serving on. So my question is, for all of the people serving here, what are the things that you've seen as creative uses for LAHA that you've been really interested in seeing how they play out as we get used to how to use these funds? But also, personally, I've had a lot of concerns too. I would say that it's great to know you've got a pool of money and it's not an insubstantial amount of money to use for trying to make strides for affordability and housing for your very local community. But on the other hand, knowing that it's earned on the back of a sales tax, which is highly regressive, so the very people who need it the most are paying the most of their income towards sales and use taxes, seems counterintuitive as well. So I'd love feedback or thoughts on both of those topics.
Okay, well, Representative Howard, why don't you start?
I was going to say, Laurie might want to just say what they've used, and if she did when I wasn't here, but Dakota County has been on the forefront of using using these local dollars creatively. But I'll say that I think every city and county is a little bit differently positioned to utilize the resources. Some communities are using them to create home repair opportunities so folks can kind of repair their homes in an affordable way. Some have used them as a bridge to kind of help build a Habitat for Humanity homes in some way as sort of a grant mechanism. Some cities have used it for some sort of direct assistance for renters. And that was sort of the intent, to be really broad and allow cities to deploy them. The one thing I'll note on the city front is just the way the formula worked out and how much resources we were able to put into it. It's kind of population based. So medium-sized and small-sized cities aren't receiving like a yearly amount that would sort of, for example, allow them to provide a huge amount of gap financing to help build a large amount of units. So in terms of how do we expand this in the future, I mean, in a perfect world, I would like to find ways for cities and counties to have more resource, because more resources needed to really attack the supply issue and unlock the production piece, because it costs a lot of money to build homes. But maybe Laurie's got other examples with what you're doing locally with it.
Okay, Laurie.
So thanks. And I have to say LAHA came at the exact right time. In 2008, when we were experiencing the last Great Recession, housing vacancies and foreclosures in Eagan, it was awful to see, and it took a long time for us to bounce back. And I feel like we are on the right trajectory. However, there's a lot of risk in the economy right now for individuals and families. And so we needed an infusion at the local level of investment in housing and housing services. And Representative Howard was such a champion in letting local governments lead. And that's not always the case with state resources. Very often it comes with a lot of strings, and they gave us a lot of latitude. So Dakota County, so I, went into my big passion is I'm in this business because I want to help people, right? I want to help families. I want to make sure that our communities are healthy and strong. And so I went right into, okay, here's the services we're going to invest in, right? And investing upstream, because we had our ability to invest in prevention has been eroded over the years, I would say, because of other local spending pressures and levy pressures and those kinds of things. And so getting to invest upstream to make sure that we have the ability to stabilize people is super important, that we can invest in, as evictions are going up after the pandemic, that we can invest in eviction court. So we've done a lot to keep people in their homes by giving them support if they are facing eviction to prevent evictions. So that's been a piece of the investment. And then the other piece, and what I'm hearing from the legislature, is there was a big expectation about what communities were going to build, where the infrastructure was going to be coming in. And so we are kind of in this position in Dakota County where the CDA has almost half, been spending about almost half of our LAHA dollars. The county's been spending about almost half of our LAHA dollars. And then there's this kind of messy middle where we're moving the dial based on what the needs are. So this year I'm going to be advocating for services because we're seeing an increase in the need for staffing in some homeless services. So I want to see us lean the dial that way a little bit on services, but it doesn't mean that we're not building at the same time. And it's given us the ability to build. So Dakota County also has purchased, the CDA has purchased the old Delta site in Egan and is working with the city to do a massive redevelopment on that. And we are going to be doing affordable housing there, multifamily housing in a big way, both senior and workforce housing on that site. And then there'll be other development as well that the city will lead, but so we're involved in the cleanup there, and then communities like Burnsville as well. I think Burnsville has done such a great job of showing how you can build density in the suburbs, and they really show a great example of, because the density that Burnsville has invested in and that we've gotten to be a part of at the CDA has really, I think, paid off in terms of economic development and vibrancy for families. And so that's where we're spending our money. It's a long and big answer because the dollars are that impactful, is what I would say. So hats off, Representative
Okay.
Howard.
Gary Hansen, do you have any thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, and we really appreciate the availability of local affordable housing aid. It's a great program. Egan chose to pool our resources along with other cities in Dakota County and work with the CDA on some specific projects. Laurie mentioned what CDA is doing with the former Delta office property. And we really appreciate them stepping forward to clean up that property and make it available not only for affordable housing, but also for market rate housing in that area. So it's going to be a good combination. About a year ago, when the CDA approached Egan, our council committed to using LAHA funds for expanded home improvement loan program, radon mitigation program, and we also directed staff to develop a low and moderate income assistance program for approved home improvement area projects. So those are specifically the areas in which we are directing those LAHA funds.
I think the Delta project is a good example of the question that I want to raise, and it'll probably be my last question, and then I'll give you guys an opportunity to do some close. It's in the context of what Chris Whitfield put into chat a little bit ago, and it's the relationship between the private sector and the government sector. I don't understand what it is that the government sector does versus the private sector. The private sector, I can see John Smith owns a construction company. He hires carpenters. They go out, they pound nails. The end result is a house, single family or whatever. Does the government hire carpenters to build houses? What is going on at Delta? Who's building it? What's the relationship between government and private? How come the market is not solving some of these problems? If I'm an entrepreneur, isn't there opportunity for me in this arena? Talk to me about those kinds of relationships and who's lifting the hammers. One of you guys want to pick this up?
Well, it's private, it's the private sector. I mean, we don't have a construction company that we own as Dakota County. So yeah, we are partnered with the private sector, and that's
Well,
who's building.
then they
And it
do
looks
want to
like
make.
Chris wants to jump in on this,
Yeah, yeah,
maybe.
okay. Chris, go ahead.
Just for a little clarification, I wasn't talking about like the private sector. I mean like BlackRock and private equity owning single
Yeah.
family. That is a large problem. That's what I was.
Yes. I can answer that one because it is a huge problem and it's a huge plank of what I hope our housing agenda looks like. Honestly, if sort of like there's three planks, it's the public investment, it's the policy reforms to unlock more production, and it is regulation of some of the worst actors in our housing space that are taking opportunities away from regular Minnesotans. So there's been several instances across the country and in Minnesota where these large out of state private equity hedge funds will come and they'll gobble up and buy single family homes. They'll turn them into rental properties. Um, we've talked to all kinds of folks that, they finally got it all lined up. They make an offer to buy a home and they get outbid by one of these entities with an all cash offer. Um, it's a huge problem. And in a way, it sort of creates this issue where, like, on the front end, I would argue we probably have a little bit too much regulation that makes it hard to build homes in the private sector. And then on the back end, we have not enough regulation because it's too easy for these private equity firms to gobble up homes and take them away from. So we have a proposal. Representative Esther Egbaje has a bill that would basically set a limit that these private equity hedge funds cannot own over a set amount of homes in the state of Minnesota. I think the bill was originally introduced at 5, to get something to, but we've talked about a range there. The other idea that we've talked about is creating basically a right of first refusal. So let's say a house goes on the market. Can we create a mechanism where it's actually Minnesotans that have the first crack at buying that home and not one of these private equity hedge funds? And so it's a huge sort of, frankly, cancer in our economy as writ large, the way that these private equity firms are sapping our communities and hoarding wealth. And so the main way we're looking at from a housing lens is to create some regulation that puts more power back in the hands of regular homeowners or people trying to buy a home.
Lori or Gary, do you have any comments on that subject? Nope. Okay. All right. Well, we've hit our hour, and I'm always mindful of people's times. So I'd like to close with this question or any other comments that you have, and that is, given the state of the Minnesota legislature, which is 50 them and 50 us, or thereabouts, what do you think you can accomplish in the next session, or what would you like to see accomplished in the next session? And I'd like to go Gary first, and then Lori second, and then Representative Howard last, since Representative Howard, you're the guy in the hot seat. So, Gary, what would you like to see them be able to accomplish in this session with a split legislature?
Well, first, I would just like to comment that Lori mentioned that there was a CD housing needs assessment, and some of the findings in Egan that I wanted to share are a bit challenging, and we need to work on those. For example, Representative Howard mentioned cost-burden households who have to spend more than 30% of their income on housing. We learned that 42% of renters and 16% of homeowners in Egan are cost burdened, and another 18% of renters and 5% of homeowners, a total of 2,500, are severely cost burdened. That is, they spend more than 50% of their income on housing. And We also learned that more than 650 households in Egan live in substandard housing. So those are issues that we need to work on. We need to meet those needs. And the way to do that is again, coordination with the county, as we have been doing, but also looking to the state and the legislature for solutions to our need for affordable housing. I really appreciate what Representative Howard said on what we're going to try to do in this third attempt in the next legislature to get some legislation passed on that.
Lori.
Thanks for that, Gary. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit when I talk about the next legislative session, because when you talk about cost burden, your property taxes are a piece of that. And so you we want to be sure that as we're having massive property tax increases, so the across the state, we're going to see the largest property tax increase statewide this year than we've seen in about a quarter of a century. And that a lot of that is coming from pressures from the federal government. And so we have to find ways, and what it has pushed Dakota County to do is to institute cuts that we didn't want to make, about 8.1%, 8.4% cuts to our budget, and then increase our levy by 9.9%. That's big in Dakota County. And so we're in a kind of first do no harm space where we don't have resources to give back to the state of Minnesota at this time. And so we want to be sure that we can maintain what we have, including our increases to CPA, the county program aid that we received a couple of years ago, because it makes all the difference, and that we continue to have the flexibility in programs like LAHA, because it makes all the difference. And then looking to the impacts that HR 1 at the federal government is going to have on the responsibilities we have. And I'm really mad about it, but we have to hire about 30 or more people and spend about $8 million just to manage the Medicaid work requirements. And no one is going to have more health care. No one is going to be healthier. No one is going to be more secure for that $8 million. And so I'm really mad about it. And it's going to have an impact on property taxes. And so any property tax, I don't think we can do relief and reform in the next year at the state level. But I do think that we can kind of at least maintain where we are in terms of what the state is asking counties to do, because we are kind of the hands and feet of the state of Minnesota when it comes especially to social services. And so but we don't always have resources that go along with those actions. And so that to me is vitally important in the next legislative session. So.
Okay, Representative Howard, you've heard the requests from other local governments. What you going to do about them?
Well, first, thank you for the invitation and just like the really engaging conversation on something that's so important. I really appreciate it. I sort of see our job at the legislature this session in two big ways. One, as you mentioned, with this tied legislature, it's just a matter of fact, anything that passes has to have bipartisan support. But if there are things that we can do to secure a bipartisan support that unlocks us our ability to move the needle, we need to pursue it. So our Yes to Homes agenda is bipartisan. I think there's an opportunity for us to work in partnership across party and with our cities to try to develop a proposal that we think can help all of us meet these goals, and that we have an opportunity to do something really meaningful this session on that front. The other job that we have, and we're talking as Democrats here, where Republicans are getting in the way of things that will make lives easier for Minnesotans, including the affordability of their homes, we need to highlight those issues to build the case, to build the groundwork, to be able to do kind of the bigger, bolder things we need to do in the long term. So, for example, regulating private equity in our housing market, it's very likely that Republicans will side with the big out-of-state hedge funds and against Minnesotans. We need to shine a light on that and find a way to have that discussion have votes on those proposals. Um, we haven't talked about this today, but Donald Trump and his federal government through HUD has released a horrible ruling that's going to kneecap a lot of our supportive, affordable housing providers to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. We need to figure out if there's a solve for this at the state level, and at a minimum, make sure we're shining a spotlight on what Donald Trump is doing to our communities. Those will have impacts on all of us and on those property tax pieces too, if we see an increase in homelessness in our communities. So we have a job to do to shine a light on what's happening in our communities, to build the long-term case. Because that's the thing. We will not be able to solve our housing shortage in one session. But what we really need to do is turn our legislature towards a more proactive, concerted hiring the priority of this issue, so that year after year after year, we continue to do the work in partnership at all levels of government to get where we need to get. So in short, yes, I believe we can take some important steps in 2026 to move the needle and lay the groundwork to get where we need to get in the long term, which is a state where everyone, can afford a place they call home.
I sure hope you're right. Well, with that, let me say thank you to all three of our guests. This conversation was, as you said, Representative Howard, very engaging, fascinating. For me, it probably raised more questions than it answered, but I'll take that up with you guys offline at some point. Next month, Saturday, January 10th. The tentative plan is to have a candidate forum for our three DFL candidates, three currently announced DFL candidates for 52A. I haven't gotten confirmation from the campaigns yet that they'll participate, but I'm certainly hopeful that they will. So we'll get that one set up. If assuming that we do, I think my co-host T. McClenty will be moderating that one. And that's what I've got for today. And I always turn it over to Curtis for last thoughts from the DFL 52 level of things. Curtis?